So I'll tell you a little bit about what, first of all, here's my objective. I had to have an objective, so I said I'm going to agree with it. I'm going to agree with what everyone else said. I might add a little bit, and I'll summarize, and then I'll send you on your way. So I figured that's my job today. So hopefully we'll do okay on doing that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the food system and more of a public health perspective of the food system. And I think you'll see that, you know, with what we've been talking about with peanuts, there's a lot of alignment there. I'm going to just do a brief overview of the health benefits. I really don't have much to say because it's already been said. And environmental benefits, and then I'm going to show some slides of a study that we're working on at the Center for Livable Future where I work, and I think you'll be really interested in it. And then maybe if we have time, a few tips on how do you communicate this to the people you interact with. If you're bloggers or dietitians or writers or communicators or marketers, what are some ways you can help communicate this? Because it's something new and different that people really don't have an awareness of. So I work at Johns Hopkins University School of Public Health. We have a center an academic center called the Center for Livable Future. And we work on the public health perspective of the food system and sustainability. So we work with policy, we work with education, we have some courses, we do a lot of research on food production, animal production. We work on the sustainable food system and all the impacts of the food system on resilience, wasted food, meat consumption, and then also we work with food policy councils and have access to healthy food in different communities, especially primarily in Baltimore, but and other places as well. So we do a lot of those things. It's a great place to be, coming from a nutrition background where I've worked in nutrition education for years, and I have and also worked with gardening and agriculture, and it's a really great marriage of those things, and just really great to be in a place where you can talk not only about what you eat, but where the food comes from and what are its impacts. So our work is really driven, this is our concept model. Our work is driven by the concept that public health, diet, food production, and the ecosystem are deeply interrelated, and that understanding of these relationships is crucial in pursuing a livable future. So looking at all the things, our health, our diet, how we produce food, the ecosystem, and all the influences on the population growth, with climate disruption, with our resources, and with equity and access as well. We always put that look at that perspective as well. So how all these interact. Here, I have a little definition here if I can find it. We think about a system in terms of a community food system in which food production, processing, distribution, and consumption are integrated to enhance the environmental, economic, social, and nutritional health of a particular place. So that's really what we're looking at when we look at a healthy food system. Another way, this is a very crowded slide, but it just shows that the web it's called the food system map or web, of all the different inputs and outputs and systems that are going on every time we eat. If you look at the consumer down there and the demand, their impact on how they influence the biological system, the economic system, the inputs, outputs. So this is not meant to look at every little part of this, but to look at to make a point that there's people and processes involved in every point of our food system. All right, so then we look about, that's the food system, let's look about sustainability. Here's just a few definitions of sustainability that I find helpful. It's best to think about sustainability really as a process rather than just a one-time thing. This is a great definition: the capacity of being maintained over the long term in order to meet the needs of the present without jeopardizing the ability of the future generations to meet their needs. And we often don't think about that in our food production, our system now. Also, it's a sustainable and resilient food system conserves and renews natural resources, advances social justice and animal welfare, builds community wealth, and fulfills the food and nutrition needs of all eaters now and in the future. So thinking of that. So that's what we think about when we think about sustainable. Before I started presenting this, I think this question has already been answered, but I had to think, okay, well, what is a peanut? As a dietitian, I always get questions about tomatoes, so that's why I have tomatoes here. It's a tomato, a fruit, or a vegetable. Well, I say, if you're a dietitian, it's a vegetable. If you're a farmer, it's a fruit. So I figured that's kind of what, looking at peanuts, certainly, peanut is a legume, but it's also considered there's the vegetables in it. So, the way I've defined it to myself is, okay, if you're a farmer, it's a legume. If you're a dietitian or, looking at dietary guidelines, it's a nut. So that helps me, but I think we've already dealt with that here. So it is funny. The peanuts are versatile and do have a lot of, characteristics that go across different food groups, which are great. Okay, so here's my premise. The way food is produced, the way our food here in the U.S. And around the world, but mostly here in the U.S., is produced and consumed diminishes the quality of food, the health, and our food security. And we're going to talk a little bit about our health, and then I'm going to go into the environmental part of it. So if you look at the dietary patterns, we looked at a lot of specific dietary patterns and diets yesterday. So this really is, we really built this base that we can say this, that scientific research provides compelling evidence to suggest that consuming a diet rich in fruits, vegetables, and dietary fiber promotes health and prevents chronic diseases. So we know that the diet we want to get to is going to be, it's the fruits, vegetables, fibers, proteins. I don't know why I don't have vegetable proteins there, but that's what I mean, plant proteins as well. So we know that. We know that our food supply right now, and the incentives and the marketing and how our food is produced and marketed makes low-quality food easier to access, prepare, and consume in the society, in the food system that we operate in now. And because of that, we eat too much food that's of poor quality, not affordable, and not sustainable. So the dietary patterns that we are in the U.S. and in these developed world really influence also how food is produced. So it's a circular thing. It's, how our food is produced influences how we eat influences how our food is produced. I'm going to focus mostly, because most of our research really is on high meat diets, which in the importance of having more plant proteins and less meat. And so we know that, and we learned this yesterday, that increased consumption of bread and processed meats are associated with an increased risk of heart disease, diabetes, some cancers, and other diseases. And we know that research suggests that diets with more vegetables and fruits and plant proteins, less meat, particularly processed meat, can reduce the risk of type 2 diabetes and heart disease and all those things. We also know there's a possible links to gut health, that red meat intake in particular. Unprocessed red meat is also associated with diverticulitis and some other digestive issues as well. So here's a good slide here, just kind of summing up. This is done by Tillman and Clark, where they did a study looking at the environmental health impacts of global diets. And this is a study we use a lot and are building on. But if you look at the different, you have type 2 diabetes, you have cancer, coronary mortality, all-cause mortality. And the blue bar is a little confusing. The higher it is, the more risk reduction, not the more risk, the more reduction in risk. So you can see that with the Mediterranean pescatarian, which is seafood, but not meat, and not like beef and chicken, poultry, and vegetarian diets, the risks are reduced even more. And then you see with cancer, the same with those dietary patterns, with coronary mortality and all-cause mortality. So as you can see, these dietary patterns really are beneficial for health, and I'm also going to argue for the environment as well. This is just, we talked about, again, I want to just summarize. Peanuts have, they're a nutrient-dense food. They contain a lot of monounsaturated fats. They're a natural source of arginine, a very important amino acid, fiber, phytosterols, vitamin E, niacin, folate, and they're also helpful for glycemic control. So there's a great, strong evidence that peanuts are influential in decreasing type 2 diabetes, with weight control, with inflammation, blood lipids, and even glycemic control for people who don't have full-on diabetes. So we know now there's a lot of benefits of peanuts in all these areas of chronic disease that we struggle with here in the U.S. Okay, so that was a little review. We got that now. We're experts. Let's talk about our diet and our environment. So I want to argue, here's my premise here, that the way we grow and consume our food is detrimental to the ability to continue to grow food, enough food of adequate nutritional value. Although food is although our food production is vulnerable to the effects of climate change, it's also, our food production is also a significant contributor to the environment and climate change as well. So again, it's that circular thing that's continuing to happen. There's many areas. I'm not going to talk about all of these today because of time, and you all want to go. But our diet and our environment are linked in terms of land use and degradation, and soil and nutrients, water use and water contamination, energy use and efficiency, our communities, the farms and the people, the communities surrounding farms where animals are raised, especially access to healthy foods in our communities, especially urban areas and poorer areas, which used to be called food deserts, but now we call them high priority food areas because the communities have asked us to change that name. Animal welfare, especially with antibiotic use, with wasted food, and greenhouse gas production. So I'm going to cover a few of these, and if you have more questions at the end, we can talk about the others. So first of all, just one thing to remember, and we've talked about, the animal foods are more resource intensive than plant-based foods in all those areas. This is just a little snapshot of beef only, and as beef as a nation, you can see that beef alone uses 33% of all water that's available for farming, for animal production, 25% of land's area of Earth's land use, and is projected to grow. We're eating a lot more meat globally, and I think we saw that slide. I think Vasanti showed that slide yesterday, that we are eating globally, the meat consumption, as people are becoming more, as communities are becoming more affluent, we're eating a lot more meat. China is a great example of that. The meat consumption in the last 20 years has gone up, I think, more than doubled. So let's talk about land use. So if you look at the land available on our globe, about 38% of our land is arable, like plantable. And the rest of it is forests, cities, deserts, mountains. So you can't plant anything on those. Here is what is livestock production. That means production of animals for food takes up a good chunk of that arable land. And all the other agriculture, that's our food, like our plant foods, are in that little green slice. So that includes not only land where animals are grazing, but also they're growing their food. And that's one of the biggest pressures on land for animal production as we eat more meat is growing the food for these animals. So it's about 3/4 of the arable land is attributed to animal production. Some of the problems with that is not only land loss of that land, but also just degradation and the soil health of growing these crops, and the demand to grow so much so fast. Erosion is one of the main problems with this. When erosion, what happens when soil erodes is you have depletion of the organic matter and of nitrogen as well. And you have as a result, you have increased reliance on synthetic and mineral fertilizers. You have a loss of carbon from that soil, the carbon that's held in there, so you have more carbon released into the atmosphere, and you have lower yields. So that is one thing. We heard about peanuts. Peanuts are actually nitrogen fixers. That requires a lot less fertilizer, a lot lower use of fertilizer. So they're a great crop to rotate in, and they've shown that when peanuts are rotated in, or legumes, peanuts and other legumes are rotated into the crop system, the crops actually do better, and the soil's more fertile, and they have higher yields and less fertilizer and fewer pesticides. So I like this quote here. It said that soil is a fragile living skin of the earth. Land degradation is a major threat to the environment, and potential significant limitations to likely success of feeding a human species is becoming more populous. So, our last speaker talked about how the world is growing, and we have a lot more people that have to produce food for. Water use is another big pull on agriculture. 70% of all water that's available is used in agriculture, and a large portion of that is animal agriculture. About 30% of all agriculture of water goes into animal production. And again, that's the feed and the care and everything of the animals. So there's a little picture there. It takes more than 2,400 gallons of water to produce 1 pound of meat. Versus 1 pound of wheat takes about 25 gallons so a lot less. And I have a peanut slide coming up. I'll let you know what peanuts are. So when we look at water, we look at two things. We look at green water and blue water. Anybody familiar with green water, blue water? Okay, yeah, of course. So blue water is green water is really your rainwater, and blue water is your irrigated water that you're providing there. And we show both because depending on weather, with climate change, you might, if there's not enough rain, you're going to need more blue water. So we're going to show both of those things when we talk about that, but it's really good to be aware when water usage is talked about to say, to specify whether or not they're using all total water, green water, blue water. There's also gray water, but we're not going to go into that. So this is another slide just showing, I think I have a pointer somewhere. Okay. Oh, there we go. So this is showing here, this is a liters per calorie water use, liter per gram of protein, liters per gram of fat. So you can look at things differently. But here, peanuts, they don't have peanuts specifically. We're going to put peanuts in the pulse category here because they're very similar. So pulse, a peanut uses pulse uses about 1.9 liters per calorie, whereas bovine meat, like beef, about 10 liters per calorie. If you go into per gram of protein, you have about 19 liters per gram of protein versus 112 grams. So just as a tenfold difference in the water uses between a plant like a peanut and beef. So you can just see the difference is quite large. Another issue besides water is waste generation. Animal waste is a huge contributor not only to greenhouse gases, but also to the safety of our water supply as well. So if you look at this is a great slide. If you look at how much waste we generate per being, human generates about 3.2 pounds a day. Did you know that? Of waste. But a dairy cow produces about 150 pounds per day of waste. That's a lot of waste for one cow. And you can see the broiler, the chicken, even chicken, if you ever had chickens, they poop a lot too. Pigs as well, great, but the ones that produce the most because they're so large are cows. But the problem is, it's about 50 times more waste than human at the cow. The problem is, our waste is treated, and it's treated and it's taken care of in that way, but animal waste is not treated. So you have, with our, per citizen, we have about a ton per citizen, for every one of us, there's about a 1 ton per person of untreated waste that the system has to deal with, or 335 million tons. I forgot what year this was. So a lot of waste out there that needs to be treated. And when it used to be the small farm where you had a few cows, it was very easy to manage the manure and the waste because it could be put on the crops and there's a little. But now as we are producing more and more meat, we need to bring our animals into smaller spaces, and we have to deal with that waste. It's not part of the system. It's not part of the circulating system anymore. Now it's something you have to deal with it, and you have to process it or transport it or make sure it's safe. But what happens with most of the waste is it ends up in these lagoons, and this is a poultry farm here, or is it a pig farm? I forgot which one. But anyway, they end up in these lagoons where it's stored, where it's stored. But what happens a couple seasons back, do you remember all the floods in North Carolina? Remember those? So what happened with these lagoons? They flooded, and that water got into the water system and the rivers and the water. So there's a lot of problems with dealing with this untreated waste, and that's because of our large demand that we have on animal agriculture.
That is for hogs. They don't use lagoons for chickens.
Yeah, it is hogs. As I said, I like this North Carolina hogs. Thank you for correcting me. You're nervous up here. So also the way we grow animal food is produced now requires more intensive, as I said, more intensive conditions and disproportionate amount of feed. So to manage these operations, chemicals, antibiotics, and pesticides are used in large quantities. And the practice of using these antibiotics is what is linked to, they're using these antibiotics in subtherapeutic doses, and that is what's leading to the antibiotic resistance that we're seeing in our system now. It's because 75% or some of the human antibiotics are being used in animals as a subtherapeutic, just to treat them, keep them from being sick. And there's shown that there's actually better ways to handle that than to use antibiotics, but the system is very slow in responding. So not only do you have the issues with the waste, you have the issues with antibiotics and the chemicals used, and you have the issues of the people who are working in these farms have more respiratory diseases and more issues themselves. And you see more of the antibiotic resistance in the communities around. And I've kept a lot of slides out, but I have a lot more about that as well. So we've talked about water, we've talked about waste, we've talked about more intensive growing conditions of animals when we are, the demand that we have to eat more animal products. And let's talk now about climate change. So we know that impacts of climate change are already apparent and continuing. So the climate change impacts are decrease of food and water supply, more frequent and intensive extreme weather events, which we are seeing. Increased heat-related mortality, which if you look, you can see that heat mortality has gone up in the past years. Population displacement and spread of vector and waterborne diseases, and increased damage from flooding and wildfires. Incidentally, we are somewhat protected from that in our culture and in our country here. We can do things to protect us, but who's the most vulnerable to these impacts are the people in the developing countries who don't have securities to fall back on. So while we are somewhat protected from it at this point, other people are not, and they, smallhouse shareholder farmers who rely on their crop actually producing that year for their livelihood, and if they lose a crop in one storm, then they don't have a security to fall back on. So just remember, even though we don't see a lot, we see some of it, but we don't see the full extent of climate change even now that's impacting people who really suffer from it. So here's just some interesting, to mitigate climate change, a lot of what you hear about is changing our transportation industry, changing our energy industry. If you were to do all these things, you got solar panels, it's going too fast, I didn't realize it was on. So you did all these things, solar panels, everyone rode bikes, you changed all to electric vehicles, do all these things, but we don't change our diet. We're not going to make it. We're not going to be able to mitigate climate change without changing our diet, and I'll show you why. So here's what we need to think a little bit more toward. There's an urgent need to shift diets to more plant-based foods. So here's our greenhouse gas emissions that are human-related, and here's all sectors is at 49 gigatons, and our livestock is 7.1 gigatons. Most of the greenhouse gas emissions that come are actually from fermentation, and enteric fermentation. So that is from cow burps, not farts, more burps. So, but you also have gases from manures, feed crops, pastures, and just energy use of producing the animals. So that's kind of where the pie breaks down. It's methane, carbon dioxide, and nitrous oxide. Methane is what comes from the ruminant enteric fermentation. That's the most toxic and potent greenhouse gas. But you also get nitrogen from the manure and the fertilizers as well. So here's our transportation greenhouse gas emissions. So if you look, transportation, this is global, it's not in the US, and it's a little different in the US. But if you look at transportation, 7 gigatons. If you look at livestock, 7.1. More greenhouse gases come from livestock than from our transportation industry, which is very interesting because when you hear all the conversation about climate, you don't hear about what we eat. Because nobody really, part of it's awareness, and part of it is kind of an uncomfortable truth. No one really wants to change what we eat. And then here is the everything with agriculture is contributing about 10.3 gigatons. So here we go. This is here's some emissions scenarios that we've worked. So this is 2010 emissions from agriculture and industry there. So agriculture's down below. This is industry. Industry. This is not just it's industry, transport, buildings, energy, all those things. So that's why that pie was smaller before, because that was only transportation. So this is all the other greenhouse gases. The climate conference in the COP21 with the Paris Climate Accord, where they set a goal of 2. The limit is here. It's 2. They don't want any more than 2 degrees. 2 degrees temperature increase by 2050 is the goal. So here's the goal. Oops, sorry, wrong way. So here's your 2050 emissions threshold for all sectors. is less than 2 degrees Celsius of warming. Right? So that's where we want to go. That's our goal line. That's to keep it down to, and actually some people are saying 1.5 degrees Celsius to mitigate like catastrophic climate change. 66% probability there at 2%. That's where we need to keep under that red line. So what's the problem with that? Because this is 2050, if agriculture is business as usual here, and we don't change anything in our diet or how we raise animals, what's the problem with this line? All of that yellow has to stick into this teeny little space if we don't change that. So that is, and so it's just to show how important it is that we change how we eat and how we produce our food. We did some modeling, and we showed that if we decrease meat and dairy by 75%, it goes down to the bottom of that arrow. And if we also decrease our food waste by 50%, we can bring our agriculture emissions down below that 10 number. So there's a lot more potential, not in making extreme changes, but making some very solid changes in how we eat and how we handle our food. So you think about this, those are global numbers. Well, should we all decrease meat is the question. Well, these are the top 10 consumers. And I'll argue that in US, Canada, Brazil, some of the South American countries, Australia as well, Israel, I would argue that the responsibility lays on us to make the changes because we are the ones that are consuming the most meat. Other countries, as we've seen, are still dealing with the dual burden of malnutrition, also dealing with animal production and issues, and it needs to be talked about in other countries, but not to the point that we need to talk about it here. So we're doing a study now, and this is a study done in our center. We're looking at the greenhouse gas and freshwater footprints of diets globally by country. We have 11 dietary patterns we're looking at, 74 different food items, and 140 countries. And we also have put in international trade matrices, which is a really new thing where we can, measure the greenhouse gases. If Denmark is importing from Brazil, then that, how the greenhouse gases impact Brazil and Denmark both with their meat consumption. So here's a model. You've seen something similar, but this is the one that we've come up with so you can just see it's over 4,100 unique observations here, and you can see the greenhouse gases from, I'll just go ahead and say, greenhouse gases from bovine meat. Over there is the far one, and that's way up, and here is our peanuts here, right down here. So you can see the difference between, this is per serving. So we actually, often you see this per kilogram, but we did it per serving to make it really more realistic. So per serving of beef, the greenhouse gas footprint is over 6 kilograms carbon dioxide equivalents, is how we look at it, and per serving of peanuts about 0.03 kilograms CO2 equivalents. Then this is a per kilo, if you want to look at it per kilo. So similar spread. Peanuts are about 0.55 kilograms carbon dioxide equivalents per kilo, where beef is up over 50, almost 55 is an average. And this is the global average here, but we are also doing it by country. So this is an interesting slide. It's very busy, but it just shows 1 kilogram of bovine meat, which is cat beef, by country with the greenhouse gases. So it's different in every country. So here you have, over on the left is Paraguay and Chile. So why are those so high? Any ideas why the greenhouse gas impacts are so high? It's because of the rainforests that are being cut down for the soy and the feed production. So that's why they are so high, and other countries are much smaller, depending on how they produce it, how much they eat as well. So that's the greenhouse gas per 1 kilogram meat by country. Okay, this is water. This is only the blue water. Remember I talked about blue water and green water. I have another slide to bring blue water and green water. But this is the blue water. This is the water that's used in irrigation and provided for. Over here you have your bovine meat, your pigs, and you see one thing to note. What do you see there that's really high? It's actually the seafood, the aquaculture, because they found that, and in our studies, the first one has actually included aquaculture and seafood, and the reason it's so high is because we don't realize that there is a lot of water that's lost, evaporation, that happens with these ponds where the fish are raised, and so actually require a lot more water for the aquaculture. Peanuts again are down. I don't have the peanut arrow there, but they're down close to the soy down there as well. Here is a comparison of peanuts and beef. So down, I have groundnuts here. I have a USA and the world number. So that's USA only, and what it is be like the global average. So USA only, the blue is the little blue is the blue water, the agriculture, the irrigation water, and the green is the rainwater. And you can see how much more compared. The two on the left are the peanuts, and the two on the right are the beef. And you can see the difference of that. But it is important because if there's a drought or something, you're going to need more blue water. So even that. So beef is not huge in blue water because so much of them are pasture. They're started in they're pasture. They're started in the pasture and then finish off in the more concentrated industrial area settings. So here's our modeling. We modeled 11 different diets. And so this is the orange is the decrease in greenhouse gas footprint with that diet. And the yellow, then the kind of greenish yellow is the green water, and the blue is the blue water. So just want to point out to you, so here is a meatless day. This is Meatless Monday. Here, not a big difference, but I would argue that it's a good first step for a lot of people to think about meat reduction in terms of, like, okay, I can do 1 day a week. That does make a difference. Here's a vegan diet. You can see how much lower our greenhouse gas impact is from a vegan diet. We also model low food chain diet, which is, actually I should watch my time. So low food chain diet, which is vegan is stuff for insects and like filter feeders like oysters. So we thought it would be fun to do like bivalves and oysters there. 2/3 vegan, similar to Mark Bittman's Vegan Before 6. We did, other than that, we said, well, let's do 5 days a week vegan. On the weekend, we can eat meat. So that's our 2/3 vegan. No red meat, 2/3 vegan. Vegetarian is not as low because of dairy and egg. Dairy has quite a footprint. Pescatarian. And the only interesting thing is here, this no red meat is actually higher in the blue water, and that's mostly because we are keeping dairy in, because the way we model it, we actually put more dairy into the diet that way. So, any questions on that? So basically, just the meatless day only is equal about 50% of U.S. population. If 50% of the U.S. population do meatless day, it's about equivalent of taking about 5 million cars off the road. So it's not nothing. It's something. It's small, but it's a good start. This is all the countries, and this is the diet. So the red is the typical diet because we compare it to the typical diet in that country, not our diet. The light pink is the Meatless Monday. And then the down below is the vegans of the different diets. You can see how it changes by country. And again, you have your Paraguays and Brazils down there. And on the right, you have your India, Ethiopia, and Indonesia down there. And the U.S. is somewhere right in here. So we're not this is per capita, though. This is not per country. Just remember that. There you go. Those things. All right, and then, so this just shows a little bit about where the greenhouse gas footprints come from. These are few different countries. We modeled this because we were doing a global Meatless Monday webinar, so that's why we have these countries here. But you can see here's Canada, for example. This just shows that the red is more bovine meat. The green is what's coming from the animal feed. Plant foods down here. So this just shows where the greenhouse gas footprints come from, what food items they come from. Just a few more things. This just shows if a whole country shifted to 2/3 vegan diet, what would happen with the savings of greenhouse gases. And you can just see how much more these countries that are high meat eaters would actually decrease their greenhouse gas impacts if everyone, this is, of course, it's not a realistic scenario, but if everyone went 2/3 vegan, you can see US, Brazil would reduce more than 300 megatons of carbon dioxide equivalents a year. So we can make a big impact by shifting in these diets that are high meat consumers. You see China up here as well. But you see these countries that are not eating much meat, who have this problem with malnutrition, they're not the ones who should be dealing with this burden. Same with water. This is if everyone went to 2/3 vegan diet, a country what we would save, and you can see the darker more. There's much more benefits coming from the countries that are also you saw higher meat eaters. And then, we talked about, does plant-based diets versus animal diets, how many people can you feed? So here is, this is our global population here. This is from 1990. So the globes are how much you can feed on a more grain-based diet, plant-based diet, and the hamburgers is how much you can feed with a meat-based diet. And you can see that in 1990, we could feed about 2.5 billion people on a meat diet, but about 6.2 billion on a plant-based diet. In 2030, or around we can do about 9.5, 10 billion people on a plant-based diet, but only 3.5 billion people on a meat-based diet. And this is our global population. So you see, we can't, in terms of providing food, you cannot provide enough food if everyone ate like we do here in the US or China. So in summary, just the recommendations this is a recommendation we provide for dietitians and for health, but I just want to highlight the first one. The most important thing to talk about is trying to replace some of our plant proteins replace some of our animal proteins with plant proteins. Start with 2 to 3, 1 day a week, 2 to 3 meals a week. We don't need to shift. We don't need to talk to everybody about becoming a vegan because it's not going to work. There's only like half the 1% of the U.S. population is a vegan, so you're not going to get 99% going to follow. But you can get people to make slow changes, and you can do some other things as well. But that's what I want to highlight there. Shifting diets is not peanuts. You can see how much peanuts eat right now, how much we eat in the U.S. We eat an average about 3.9 ounces in equivalents versus the amount of poultry, beef, pork that we eat here. So we do have a job in shifting people more toward plant-based. Even though we're eating a little bit more, we're not getting to the point we need to. So really just emphasizing plant-based proteins because of the nutrition, because of the expense, we talked about that, because of how easy they are to grow, because of how good they are in the soil, all those reasons to talk about plant-based proteins. But we also have to change perspectives because right now when we think about food, we often think about, this is how we think about food, and especially as nutrition practitioners, but we need to have people think about where food comes from. There's a study done by, in comparing Dutch and Americans and what they feel are the climate mitigation options. People said yes. More in Holland than here said yes, eating less meat is important, but they never put it as a very important thing. They did another study I thought was great. This was just showing the green are the more high-impact things to save CO2, and the blue are the lower ones. And if you see over on the right, replacing gasoline with a hybrid car, that's something we talk about doing a lot, right? Well, actually, it's only a moderate impact. But you have here, right here, just switching to a plant-based diet is actually one of the high impact things we can do. The one that's very, very high is having one fewer child, or living car-free, avoiding a transatlantic flight, which we're probably all going to do today. So that's another thing. So just as you are working, I just encourage you to really help. Building awareness is the first step to do. So you're not getting people to make major changes, but really building awareness, contextualizing how are the people you work with, the people you communicate, are they aware of this? What's their culture and their background? How are they going to take saying don't eat meat, eat more peanuts? People don't like to have things taken away from them. So focusing on taste, simplicity, and cost, which we've been doing all weekend, is a great way to start opening that up, opening up that conversation where people are realizing that, because this is a new concept for many people. I'm going to skip through these with the time, but just people are concerned about some of the IFIC studies have shown that people are starting to be very interested in sustainability, where the food comes from the GMO. This is a great thing on their site, just looking at different profiles of consumers and just what their interests are. And you can see the foodies are they have more interest actually in food. Which ones have more interest in sustainability, and which ones are more interested in healthfulness. So those are great ways to message. And this is in the IFIC papers. But there's a lot of confusion. And so we as nutrition educators, as bloggers, as health communicators need to talk through this confusion and help provide good, clear information. We need to talk about the health. That's the first, when you talk about meat reduction, the most reason people reduce meat and eat more plant-based is health. May not be the most important all the time, but that is really an entrance point for so many things. But it depends. Some people have more awareness, some people are they love nature. That's a great way to start. So where can you start that? Start promoting more plant-based diets, less meat. and just teaching how to do this. You can talk about things like this. We have this comparison of a beef burger versus a soy burger. I think we could do the peanut burger is what I'll do next. But this shows the water difference, 450 gallons of water for a hamburger versus 32 gallons of water for a soy burger. So that's how much it takes. So look on teaching, helping people to learn toward competence, learning how to cook, learning how to taste, having more hands-on is important as well. Just in that what we did, even with our confidence in making peanuts yesterday, great, we can imagine what you can do with your communication. And I have to shout out to Meatless Monday. Our center is the science advisors to Meatless Monday, so we do a lot of the evaluation and provide the research behind what they do. It's a campaign, it's a free campaign, but it's a great message if you communicate it right, that, hey, we can do one step. And in one step, if people start trying something, a peanut dish one day, well, why wouldn't they make it on Wednesday if they make it on Monday? So it really does open them up to new tastes, new flavors. It's a great way. It's something that was actually started in World War I to save resources for the troops, and brought back again by Sid Lerner, who was a big marketing guy, in 2003. So, you know, Monday seems to be a best day to change. They really hold on Monday because they say, well, Monday is the day where people, after the weekend, there's some evidence that more people do Google searches for health, health-related behaviors. How do I quit smoking? How do I quit drinking? How do I lose weight? You know, how do I eat better? Because Monday, that weekend was tough. But it's like 52 New Year's. You know, every Monday you got this. So you have 52 opportunities a year to talk about it. So Monday's a great idea for doing. So that would be a great thing. If you have any questions or need resources on that type of communication, let me know. I can help you. I can link you with the Meatless Monday campaign. They're run out of New York, but we do work very closely with them. So that's it. Thank you. Here's our website. One thing I also want to mention, our website, you can find a curriculum called Food Span. If you do any nutrition education or foods, it's a whole high school curriculum, but it can be adapted. It's 12 different lessons. It's free, has slides, everything. So it's a great resource tool if you do any education. I was going to take a picture, put it up here, and I didn't have time to. But we do have this curriculum that teaches through the whole food system. So it's a great, pull things out, use it as you want. It's free. I was on Southwest working on this presentation last week, and when I was going for another thing, and I had peanuts, and I thought I would take a picture of my peanuts that I was holding while I was writing this presentation. So anyway, that's it. Thank you. Sorry I went so long. And